Hello and welcome to the Read to Inspire podcast. My name is Sibongiseni Mkolozeli and I will be your host. I started this podcast because I want to help promote the reading culture within the African continent and beyond. My vision is to see each and every African home with a bookshelf. And as long as that bookshelf is bigger than your television screen, I will be happy. I believe that reading is the absolute best foundation ever for all material success. So if you want to develop and grow in your personal, professional, and spiritual capacity, reading must be your starting point. In conducting this podcast, I will not be alone, but with inspiring authors from all over the world. So if you are a published author and you'd love to be my guest someday, kindly drop me an email at readtoinspire.podcast@gmail.com. Again, that's readtoinspire.podcast@gmail.com. My guest today is Wandile Sihlobo, and we'll be discussing his book, Finding Common Ground, Land, Equity, and Agriculture. Wandile is a chief economist at the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa and has previously served as an economist at Grain SA. He holds a master's degree in agricultural economics from Stellenbosch University. He is also a visiting research fellow at Wits School of Governance in the University of Witwatersrand. Wandile is a member of President Cyril Ramaphosa's Economic Council, as well as one of the 10-member advisory panel on land reform and agriculture. Wandile was named Agriculturist of the Year for 2018 by Agricultural Writers SA. In 2019, he was included on the Mail and Guardian's top 200 young influential South Africans list. Finding Common Ground is his first book. Mr. Wandile Sihlobo, welcome to the Read to Inspire podcast.
Thank you so very much. Pleasure to be able to join you and to discuss this work. It is some ideas that I've developed over time, so it's always good to sit down and revisit some of the thoughts that are in. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. So just to kick off the show, I would like to know from you, when did you start reading books outside the academic space, and what book title hooked you or plugged you into the culture of reading?
Sure. This is a tough one because I'm not one of those people that are early readers. If I were to be honest on that, because throughout when you are in high school and everywhere, we were reading, but mostly more magazine type of stuff that you do find in the homes, as well as newspapers. It might be either Sunday Times, Drum Magazine, and all of those things that were pretty much common to find. But I think that side of that, where I began reading was more on a fiction work. I read works of the people like Mtutuze Linyoka and all of those guys, and that was late or maybe early then at my age, because it was like 2007, 2008. That's where I could remember the books that I read. And obviously at the time, there were also books that when you're looking back at them now, everybody was reading works of people like Dan Brown. They might not be deep reading, but those were engaging stories at the time. So I read that as sort of a fiction, and obviously then the Harry Potters and all of these things that everybody read at the time. So those were the works that I think we engaged more with in as far as reading outside of academia in the earlier years.
Right. So I listened to the conversation you had with Mbali Nwoko on her podcast last week, and of course, many others in the past. I've also watched you being interviewed by several news channels on television like ENCA and Newsroom Africa. I must say, you are very articulate in your conversations and generally eloquent in the manner in which you speak. So tell us, by how much would you credit the habit of reading to your impeccable communication skills?
Yeah, I think you're very kind to say to categorize in that way, but I will take the compliments. Those don't come very easy, so thank you for that. But I think, obviously, I think reading enhances in the communication in any way, because what happens is when you're about to write down stuff, are actually forced to think through the idea. We're not writing. What will typically happen is you will be in a position where it's easier to say stuff. But when you are sitting down, you are forced to conceptualize it in a methodological way and think about sequencing of all of those ideas. Then I guess if you are used on thinking in that way and thinking in a writing form, then on speaking also you would tend to be in that sort of way, because sometimes when I read my pieces and stuff, I could almost hear myself. So I think it is on that. So certainly I think writing does assist in how you get your point across when you're speaking. And I think on both of those things benefit, because then as you converse with more people and you engage in various aspects, you learn from them on how they express themselves and how they understand issues. And that feeds back to your writing as well. But I think the core of reading and writing is teaching you how to express in a sequenced way whatever that you want to get across to your reader. So I would credit it to that, and I would take that compliment. Very kind of you.
You are welcome. So what advice can you give to someone who finds it hard to read or who don't want to read books generally, yet they want to succeed in life?
Sure. Okay, this is a difficult one, because I mean, I wouldn't necessarily, say if you are not reading books, you will not succeed. But what I find when I read about people who are successful, either it's Elon Musk's of this world, it's Warren Buffett's, and all of these guys, people that are successful tend to read, because reading also means that you must have patience and time to pay attention and sit down and be still and digest material and think it through. I don't think you can leave the world through always making harsh decisions and experiencing the world through opinions that you are told over the dinner table. So one way or another, I think you have to try to cultivate the ability to sit down and read. And I think, I mean, people might say they don't like to read. Happen that people don't generally dislike to read, only if they are presented with the material that is in their side. When I like sport, I will read the Kickoff magazine, because you want to know what's going on, what's the ranking, what are the developments. And back then 2007, 2004, the internet was also, at least in my community, not as today, where you can access some of these things. So you were forced to slave through the Kickoff magazine and all of these hard magazines to read in order to really access and understand what's happening in the stuff that you like. So find what you like, find the material that is in line with what you like. But I think we must push ourselves to have patience and ability to read. I wouldn't necessarily say we shouldn't. When you can't, obviously you will do audio material and stuff like that. But I think we must get in a habit of learning and exposing ourselves to people that are from different perspectives, different backgrounds, different fields, so that we may be able to learn and expand our world.
Right. Now, Wandile, let's dive into your book, Finding Common Ground, Land, Equity, and Agriculture. Tell us, when did you start pursuing your passion for writing, and what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, I mean, I started writing or putting up work in a public space right around about 2014. And those are the essays that appeared on Business Day. And the key thing, I mean, at the time, I was enjoying a lot of people that were writing for Business Day. I was enjoying Nomalanga Mkhize. I was enjoying Paulo Jordan. I was enjoying Kandi Bai, Songezo Zibi, Mzubisi Kobo, a number of great writers, Zama Ndlovu, Gandlovu. So there was a lot of great work that was actually happening at the time. So, but what I was finding, or particularly recognized at the time, is that in all of the top papers, either you were looking at the Daily Maverick, you're looking at the Mail and Guardian on Business Day in South Africa, agriculture was not coming up into those discussions. It would come up, obviously, in a news story when something has happened, but amongst the columnists, the discussions were not there. And at the time in 2014, we were also approaching what we saw on our side. Back then, I was economist for Grain SA, as if we were going to have this heavy drought that was coming, and no one was actually discussing it in broader terms. And then I guess that was one of the things then that, encouraged me to say, okay, let me actually take this drought story, take what's going on in agriculture and try to put it in the public platform. The first piece that I ever wrote, which is why I always tell people when they start writing to say, you have to be patient with yourself. I think it took a month to produce a 700 words essay, 700 words that actually ended up appearing on business day. When people now are sitting next to you at the airport and they see you put down a column in 30 minutes and then they read it the next day and the column, they feel that it is good and they think that you're doing it easily. I think it comes with time, but also it comes with many things that you have already conceptualized on your mind and you already have a structure of how you write. But in the earlier days, that was a challenge. But obviously then back to your point, after having started writing that, I continued consistently to write. Songezo Zibi, who was the editor of Business Day, was kind enough, gave me the space. He said, you know what, you could continue giving us material as we deem it relevant, we'll publish it. Up until 2016, they gave me a regular column. So the book came about, all of those things. I'm giving this background because that's what the book pretty much emanates from. After some time, when I got into 2020, 2019, I began looking back to say, okay, we've gone through difficult periods of drought. We've come out of drought. But at the time when we were in a drought, we were hearing that this was the worst drought since the 1980s and 1990s. And when we look back to say, what did the people in 1990s and 1980s actually do to come out of this drought? And we're not finding any material that is actually substantial that we could actually reference from to see how were they responding, what were their conditions we were living now hearing analogies of people who were there, but also looking at historical data. And then my thing was now, okay, I don't want people in 2030 to look back and say there was a drought in 2015, but they can't really find out on what we did. So I thought, okay, what I would do, I would collect all my writings of a particular period and try to form the bit of an agricultural economic history. And the book came about working through and aggregating that work which mirrored that period in time. It's a long answer, but I wanted to give that background on why did this essay come about.
So the first half of your book is on land reform issues and policies. Take us through the history of land reform programs in South Africa before 1994 and post-apartheid until their suspension in the year 2006, and maybe tell us what really caused their suspension during that year.
Yeah, I mean, look, the land reform story obviously dates back, 1800s, because we like to talk about 1600s, but we like to talk about, 1913, which was when really the Land Act come into the laws. But the historian tell us that there was already dispossessions and cattle killings and many other things that were happening way before that. During the wars of conquest and everything that was happening. So the land reform story in South Africa has that perspective. And obviously in 1913 up until 1996, there was a lot of these discriminatory policies that were put in place. Firstly, taking the land away from Black folks, but also putting on deliberate agricultural policies that favored white South Africans. And really leaving Black farmers destitute in all of the marginal lands that they were already farming. So you have that history. And obviously you get to 1994, and one of the key points on the ANC, which dates back in their earlier policy, was that we need to address the land issue, which is where the land reform policies come about. But obviously in South Africa, I've skipped many important steps, obviously, in that history. But then in South Africa, as we begin 1994, we really have about 3 branches on land reform. Redistribution, which says, let's share the land equally. And then you have land tenure, which says, let's go back in areas where the land rights are weak. Let's strengthen the land rights of the people in those areas. And then you have the land restitution, which says if you could prove that before 1930, from 1913 up until the end of apartheid, your folks were dispossessed in certain areas, you can put the claim on that and then proper processes will be followed. So those are the lenses under which we're moving from. And obviously in the ANC papers, it was a view that 3 years from 1994, we'll be able to have had 30% of the land already been transferred from whites to South Africa, to Black South Africans. And when you look at the statistics now, we are far behind at those targets. but obviously by percent, the work that is at the Stellenbosch University from people like the great Professor Johan Kirsten and many other folks, it shows that there's been some good progress, and the numbers are sitting somewhere around about 22%, not at 9% that folks refer to, but obviously still very slow. And there are a number of things that caused those failures in reform. Corruption sometimes both in government as well as in the private sector, in inflating their prices and everything. So there was a lot of issues that have resulted to that, which in the book I delve into. But the 50% of the book chapter deals with much of the contemporary history of the land reform, and also looking at it from an economic perspective. And then arguing then, not only just pointing out the failures, on saying going forward, what could be some of the options that we should consider for making sure that at least we do see progress in land reform in a sustainable way.
Absolutely. The land question became a hot topic around the year 2017, with the EFF being in the forefront of that debate. Tell us about the potential dangers that could culminate if the ANC was to implement the proposed expropriation of land without compensation, particularly for commercial farmers or commercial lands.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we look back on when this stuff of expropriation came about, I mean, you will remember that from around about 2013, having land under which expropriation would happen. And also they highlighted to say, okay, it must not negatively affect food production, not negatively affect the economy and stuff like that. So if you were to look at expropriation within that prism, in which the ANC is suggesting, it would tend to seem that, you know, there's a limited scope onto that. But if you were to go with the EFF route, which in my reading of their policies, they're looking at a widespread nationalization. So there are a lot of economic consequences that would happen in the financial services sector, but also I think that it would end up being a zero-sum game, even for the very same Black people that you claim you want to enrich. Because at the end of the day, the way the economy is set up right now, it's no longer like we were in the 1913. We are much more ingrained in the global financial system, and confidence is everything. And to make anything of marginal improvement in agriculture, you really need investments. And investments will come where there are strong property rights and stuff like that. So this is also one of the things that in the book I dig into in a much more sequenced and a methodological way. But the bottom line point is that my view is that we don't really need to change a constitution to allow expropriation without compensation. The economic cost is too large, but also legally, there is a view from people, either it's Babalwa Mabasa or you are talking about to Tembeka and Mugaitobi, who are saying, look, the constitution already allows for expropriation to happen without changing the constitution. And that's the view that I really hold also in the book. And there are essays that are dealing with this issue.
So what are the key lessons from history which should be used as a guiding principle for a more robust land reform process?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in the book, I carry more of the economic style lessons, not really some drawing from history, but reflecting on the current state of the economy and say, going forward, what should you be doing? And I mean, it's not only by practical things of saying, South African government is holding on its balance sheet 9 million hectares of land, begin releasing that first, and then thereafter, think about creating the land reform fund, which will draw finance from various sources of capital. Then you buy some of the land in the market. And obviously in that equation, there are arguments, again, from Tembeka Mugaitobi and the likes of Theo Boshoff, who are saying you don't actually even need to pay the market price for that land. And the constitution doesn't say pay a market price. Therefore, you can come up with creative ways of getting the land in the market at below market rates, without actually destabilizing or undermining the property rights. And the other issues that I include in the book. And obviously, if you read also even the new book by Tembeka Mugaitobi, Land Matters, he comes up with innovative ways of compensation under which we should think about going on to land reform. So I would even urge the reader to say, read my book from an economic perspective and pair it up with Mugaitobi for history as well as a legal perspective. Then you could get a much more robust and well-rounded view, because I think the material tends to complement each other on the aspect that we are covering.
So how can the South African government implement a decentralized and effective land reform program to restore land, especially land rights to the majority of our people, Black people to be specific?
No, I mean, it is there in its documents. Chapter 6 of the NDP does spell out the decentralized system of how to do land reform. But also, even if you read the Presidential Advisory Panel on Land Reform, we spell out those. And in some of the essays in the book, that's where then I say use your district land reform models that can be able to assist in that process. But obviously then that theoretically it is sound, but I mean, let's face it, there are also challenges there that we could face, which results with the lack of capacity at local government institutions. But I think that a much more effective land reform system is the one that would lean also partially from the private sector, particularly when we deal with the agricultural side, to say what can private sector do, what can government do? At ACTIS, for example, we had said that let's go on a 50-50 basis on land reform, where private banks could put a loan of about 50% on a price on a land parcel, government put a 50%, and the government didn't really have a good uptake of that model. So going back into some of the things that have been proposed over the past decade and really pulling up the examples of one that we think that they can be piloted, that's the way I think we could actually see some bit of progress.
Talk to us about the potential of the South African agricultural sector as central to boosting rural development, economic growth, and job creation. What seems to be lacking and what is needed in order to maximize this potential?
Yeah, I mean, the South Africa's agricultural economy has grown significantly over the past decade. If you look at the value of the gross value added in rands term from 2010 up until 2020, grown by roughly 44%. If you look at the volume of agricultural products in total from 2010 to 2020, about 19%. So there's been good activity. But going forward, obviously, we are still seeing it as part of the sectors that can contribute to economic growth and job creation. And that will also then involve largely of saying, are there any other new lands under which the South African government can pretty much be able to put into full production, and also private citizens can put into full production? And that's where I think that through the expansion in agricultural activity, that's where we can pretty much see added value. And there are provinces that have underutilized land. If you think of the Eastern Cape, KZN, Limpopo, that's some of the provinces that we could pretty much see some bit of activity happening. And government, I know that we're already having that in the master plans and all of these documents that are being crafted. And I think that as part of the broader economic growth and reconstruction plan, we could see those contributing immensely to the recovery.
Speaking of economic growth, the South African agricultural sector exports about 49% of its produce in value terms. Can you break down that 49% in terms of commodity share? I know South Africa has been the second largest exporter of citrus after Spain for the past decade or so. How much does the citrus industry contribute towards that 49%? And what about other exportable products like wine, field crops, and livestock?
Yeah, the way to look at that, and especially with the new data now of 2020, I mean, I think we are probably, half of what we produce, yes, you're right, goes to export markets. And last year we had the second largest exports on record, roughly $10.2 billion of that. The top five, obviously, you're starting off with your citrus, following with wine, and then you follow with pears and grapes and maize. But the bottom point is that you have the large horticultural space that is leading on the exports, mixed with grains, wine, and those are really our major boost. In some of the other commodities, either it's meat, beef, we are still very small in terms of the overall exports. That's where we still have to grow by bringing all of those black farmers that are in the Eastern Cape into the formal meat value chains over time and stuff. But I think all of our commodities, the major ones in the fruits, as well as the grains and the wine, are the key drivers of our export activity. And we are beginning to see nuts also adding into that. So we have a diverse, nice mix of products that we are exporting.
So there are two crops which you seem to be optimistic about in terms of their potential for influencing the economic transformation in the sector: blueberries and cannabis. Talk to us about the latest developments since the 2018 Zondo judgment.
Yeah, I mean, on the cannabis space, there is really great potential there because that's the territory that is largely we now in a space all of the legislative hindrances. And you heard the minister's budget speech. She alluded to the point that by some time around June and towards the end of the year, we could already be seeing licenses being issued into that. So, and that's the crop that we know that has been grown under the shadows of the law. If you look at parts of the Eastern Cape, KZN, so it's really going to be opening up that particular market. I mean, as far as the blueberry is concerned, I mean, already that's a major growing industry in South Africa. But what we like about it a lot is that it is also labor intensive. It's high value. The demand globally for it is there. So it's one of the crops that should be promoted, and we could be able to actually see some bit of good gains on doing that. And I think that South Africa is making efforts onto that, and we might actually be able to see some bit of gains over time.
So in almost all your articles or blog posts this month and in the past month, you keep mentioning the agricultural master plan by the government. And as of recent, you spoke about the cannabis master plan as well. Can you unpack them for us and tell us what exactly is the government aiming to achieve with these master plans?
Yeah, I mean, I can't go into details of them. Because the documents are yet to be released, but what they aim to achieve is really contributing to the economic reconstruction and growth. Because the master plans are the subset of what the president announced in October last year, which was the announcement of the economic reconstruction and recovery plan of South Africa. So every then department and the subsector had to come up with its master plan on saying where they are looking forward. What are some of the interventions that they need to be put in place so that they may be able to actually see some bit of a recovery? And the whole thesis of this master plan is to say they are done on a PPP approaches. You have the private sector on the table, you have government on the table, you have labor, you have society, and everyone saying, okay, let's look at this industry, what's possible? And on agriculture, there's a wide array of issues. We have come up with commodity corridors, major commodities to be prioritized, and outlined what are the factors that are hindering progress in each and every commodity and why, when they should be addressed and what are the timelines. So that's what is being done onto that and who should do what. And the cannabis master plan pretty much in that same ethos. That's what is being followed there, with the hope that if then they are launched and they are implemented and everyone has a buy-in onto them, we could begin to see some bit of progress in the sector.
You recently did a book review on Gregory Mthembu Salter's new book in your blog. And in the first line of that article, you said agricultural books are not widely available in popular bookstores in South Africa. Can you share some advice to agricultural book writers and other authors in general on what they should do to make their books available nationwide, just like yours?
Firstly, they should write them.
Okay.
They should write the books.
Yeah.
I say that facetiously, but it's an important thing because the books are not actually there.
True.
Because, I mean, we do find the material here and there, but the first thing is about us understanding the agricultural economy, the agricultural sector. Either you're looking at from a crop science, animal science, whatever, labor, whatever, and then taking those stories and putting them into something. Because we're not stuck with a situation where the South African bookstores maybe do not want to accept agricultural books, but rather we're in a situation where we are not writing the agricultural books. Then I would implore this back to the people that are in agriculture. Either you are a farmer or whatever, tell the stories that you and your friends talk about. If you are a scientist, share what you are passionate about in the book. That will be something that will be read by everybody else, because I know that we do a lot of work on scientific discipline focused work, which is useful for productivity and growth in our sector and for growing the knowledge base. But also we need to engage the general public by discussing other things. And that's something that lies on us as agricultural people to actually be able to do that work.
So I have one more question, not related to the book, but still on the subject of agriculture. It's basically coming from your latest article from your blog about Zimbabwe. So they just banned exports from, I don't know, is it from South Africa only or for anyone? They do not allow imports, especially for maize. And why is that?
Yeah, they don't allow imports from anybody. I mean, Zimbabwe has a difficult history in agriculture. As you know, since the year 2000, they've been on a net importing side of food. And this year, which is the 2020-21 season, they've been fortunate. They have the largest maize harvest since 1984. And this has enabled them to pretty much be able to be in a good position in as far as maize supplies. And then they've decided that, you know what, let's cancel everybody else out so that we could begin procuring maize from our own farmers and supporting our own sector. So that's what then has happened within Zimbabwe. But obviously, it's nothing really to worry about if you are South Africa, because even if they didn't ban those maize exports, it was going to be cheaper for Zimbabwean people to buy their own maize. And some, they actually have their own supply and they're producing at small scale level. And South Africa that now has to focus more on the Far East markets, which is where we have the possibility of actually getting more of our exports to. And obviously the Zimbabwe stuff is temporary now that they're having a good season. If anything happens in the next season, that policy could be reversed anytime by their government.
Interesting. So I have 3 more questions that I want to ask, which are not related to your book itself, but still on the subject of riddling. Tell us, what are the 2 or 3 book titles that have made the biggest impact in you that you would recommend to anyone, and why?
Sure. I wouldn't necessarily say, biggest impact, but I would say one of the books that are, okay, let me put it this way. If you want to enjoy the beauty of writing, like the pinnacle of writing,
yeah,
you gotta read Ta-Nehisi Coates. One of his works that I've enjoyed, and I mean, I read that book in a day. I think I picked it up at around 10 at Menlyn, Maine in Pretoria. I sat down in my couch and I thought I was going to read a few pages. I couldn't put that thing down until late evening, 6 p.m. or something. The book called Between the World and Me. And the way Mr. Coates writes, that's, and I don't mean that jokingly when I say the pinnacle of writing. That's where it is. So I would recommend that. And also some other good reading again from him. If you read, We Were 8 Years in Power, that's also one of the other good writings that I would say. And the impression I would say that those books make, I mean, it's just the art, the way he tells stories. That's one of the things that I enjoy a lot. And obviously, again, I mean, most of the books that I'm reading, aside from him, were in fiction. I would say, Teju Cole, Open City, is one of the books that I enjoyed the most as a fiction. But I think some people might enjoy that a lot. And I think outside of some of those works, and obviously, I read more work that is in economics and history and stuff like that, which, by the way, then that gets to be useful also on my work. I'm now just finished reading Robert Schiller, Narrative Economics, which is one of the useful works. I would say anyone, either you're in economics or outside, you could buy that book because it tells you how stories really influence the economic changes in society. So it's one of the stuff that I had been just enjoying over the past few weeks. So that's something I would say somebody should pretty much really get that.
So Wandile, you are one of the busy people I know in South Africa, and I'm curious to find out what are the current or future projects that you are currently excited about and which keep you motivated or inspired. And if you can also share with us, when can we expect the next book from you?
Yeah, the next book, that's the question that my publishers, Andrea at Pat Macmillan is on my case about that. Yeah. I have to get that done. But I think the next book will not be published this year. It will probably be published early next year. But I am working on something for folks at Pat Macmillan. That's what I'm busy with. But obviously for other projects, I mean, I'm writing for a number of newspapers locally, and I'm trying to now cover more of the regional work and also publish more for global platforms, either Project Syndicate, The Guardian, and stuff. I'm trying to get some work into those platforms because I think it's useful now to begin reflecting more regionally about the stories and the things that we are observing. So that's the path that I think my writing is pretty much gonna be taken. But I'm not. I was not joking when I was telling Wandile that I'm not that busy. I have time. I just protect my time and be selective.
I see. All right. Thank you, Wandile. So one more last question. For people who want to stay informed about the agricultural sectors, particularly the one in South Africa that you mostly write about, tell us, maybe through your articles, how do they subscribe to your blog so that they can stay informed, and where else do you normally publish these articles?
Yeah, I think in my blog, I mean, just wandilesihlobo.com, there's going to be a section for subscription there. They get the content for free, so they could subscribe there. But also, my work appears on the Business Day. It appears on Fin24. It appears on Farmers Weekly. And it appears on Project Syndicate for global audience. So there are those platforms where I think people could find some of the things that I'm thinking, but the most urgent stuff, I also just put it on a blog, and then they'll be able to get that free of charge. And even the work that appear on other newspaper, after a couple of days, it does make its way to the blog.
Are you available on socials?
One social where I'm fairly active. I'm on Twitter at Wandile Sihlobo. But on other socials, you know, people might think I'm not responsive, but I don't pay much attention. But on socials, I'm there, LinkedIn and Twitter, just my full name.
Okay, awesome. So thank you, Mr. Sihlobo, for honoring my invite and making time for this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so very much.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That was Wandile Sihlobo, Chief Economist at the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa. For more book reviews, please subscribe to the Read to Inspire podcast. My name is Sibongiseni Mgolozeli, and until next time, goodbye.